Years of routine had shaped my life into a comfortable, predictable rhythm. Steady job, active lifestyle, and a marriage I thought was built on mutual respect and trust. Rachel and I had been together for over 6 years, and everything seemed secure. But in the last few months, something shifted. I didn't notice it at first, just small things, fleeting moments where she seemed distracted, irritated, or distant. Little jabs in our conversations that weren't there before, or long silences at the dinner table. It was nothing overt, nothing concrete, but enough to make me wonder if we were slipping away from each other. I told myself it was just a phase. Every couple goes through tough times, right? Maybe she was just stressed from work, or maybe it was the fact that we hadn't taken a vacation in over a year. But when I started noticing the changes in her routine, I couldn't ignore the growing unease gnawing at the back of my mind. She'd come home later, always offering vague excuses about being stuck at the office or having drinks with her colleagues. There were new patterns in her behavior, more secrecy, more hidden phone calls, a sudden interest in her appearance that I hadn't seen in years. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just a result of our daily grind. But deep down, I knew something was off. The tipping point came when I found a hotel receipt in her purse one evening. A small, innocuous slip of paper, yet it shattered the fragile illusion I had built. The date was recent. I stared at it for what felt like hours. I knew then the cracks I had been ignoring were not only real, they were wide and growing. This wasn't just a rough patch. Something much deeper had shifted. That's when I decided to follow her. It was a Wednesday, and I had taken the day off, pretending to have a personal appointment just to see where Rachel was really going after work. She left her office around 6 p.m., her usual schedule, and I trailed her car, keeping a safe distance. She drove through familiar streets, but then took a strange turn, one I'd never seen her take before. My heart started racing. She didn't go home. Instead, she parked in front of a sleek downtown bar, the kind with velvet ropes and expensive cars lining the street. My stomach twisted. This wasn't the kind of place she'd ever frequented, at least not without telling me. She got out of the car, adjusting her dress, glancing around before walking inside with a determined stride. There was no hesitation in her movements, no sign of uncertainty. I sat in my car, staring at the entrance, trying to steady my breath. I should have driven away, I should have turned around, gone home, and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I didn't. I walked into that bar. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with smoke and expensive perfume. I ordered a drink at the bar, trying to blend in, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Rachel wasn't far away. I saw her almost immediately, sitting at a table with a man I didn't recognize. She was laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. My stomach dropped. They were too comfortable with each other, too intimate. I watched as he leaned in, brushing her hair back from her neck, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, a smile playing on her lips. I felt the ground slip away beneath me. This wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper, something built over weeks, months, maybe even longer. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of there, but the bile in my throat kept me rooted in place. And then, just as my mind screamed at me to leave, she saw me. Her gaze locked onto mine, and I saw it. The instant recognition, followed by a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Her face faltered for a moment, then she smiled, though it was tight, forced. "Oh, look who it is," she said to the man beside her, loud enough for me to hear. "My husband, the perfect husband. How sweet." The words were dripping with sarcasm. My blood boiled. I stood up, ready to confront her, to demand the truth, but as I moved towards her, the man stood up as well, blocking my path. He was easily 6'4", built like a brick wall. His eyes were cold, and the way he sized me up made my heart race. "You're in the wrong place, buddy," he said, his voice low and menacing. And before I could respond, I felt a strong hand on my shoulder. Another man, one of the regulars, had come up behind me, clearly thinking I was out of place. He shoved me away, and in the blur of anger and confusion, I found myself stumbling backward, out of control. My fists clenched, and for a moment I considered fighting back. But I wasn't prepared for this. This wasn't some argument over dinner or a disagreement over the phone bill. This was something real. My wife was here, with another man, and I couldn't handle it. I spun around, trying to make my way for the exit, but someone grabbed my arm. I swung, hitting the man in the jaw, but the force of my punch only seemed to annoy him. He swung back, a fist like a sledgehammer connecting with my ribs. Pain exploded in my side, and I gasped, struggling to stay on my feet. Another man stepped up, and before I knew it, I was surrounded. The huge guy I'd seen with Rachel earlier stepped toward me, laughing. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin our fun?" he sneered. "She's mine now, pal. You had your chance." The words cut deeper than any punch. I tried to protect myself, tried to fight back, but my body was too slow, too battered. Everything hurt. Every part of me seemed to throb with a burning pain. I couldn't see straight, couldn't think. All I knew was that Rachel wasn't just betraying me emotionally. She was in this man's arms, and I was nothing but a fool. As I was dragged toward the back of the bar, I heard Rachel laugh, a laugh that made my blood freeze. "Go ahead, break him. He's weak. He's always been weak." I blacked out shortly after that. The world around me felt distant when I finally regained consciousness. I was lying on cold, damp pavement, the air heavy with the scent of gasoline and cigarette smoke. The faint buzz of traffic in the distance sounded muffled, like I was underwater. My head ached, and every breath was sharp with pain. It took me a few moments to gather my thoughts, to remember what had happened. And then it hit me like a wave. The fight. Rachel. The man in the bar. I groaned involuntarily as I tried to push myself off the ground, but my body refused to cooperate. My ribs screamed in agony, and my legs felt like they were made of stone. Slowly, I pulled myself into a sitting position, but the world still spun. "You're awake, huh?" A voice cut through the fog in my mind, familiar but taunting. It was the man from the bar, the one who had shoved me, the one who had laughed at me while Rachel, my wife, laughed with him. I squinted up at him through blurred vision, my head still swimming with dizziness. He was leaning against a rusted car, arms crossed, his expression a mix of amusement and contempt. "Did you think you could just show up and ruin the fun?" His voice was mocking, and I could see the arrogance in his eyes. "She's not yours anymore, buddy. You're just the guy who got in the way." The words cut deeper than any of the physical blows I'd taken. A cold, heavy lump formed in my throat as I tried to process what was happening. My wife, the woman I loved, had not just been unfaithful. She had chosen him, someone like him, over me. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to rise. No, I wouldn't break. Not here, not now. I forced myself to stand, each movement a struggle against the pain in my chest. The man laughed as I staggered to my feet, a weak smile creeping across his face as he watched me try to steady myself. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he taunted. "You're not even close to the man she wants, and tonight she's going to be with me, while you limp off to wherever you think you belong." I took a deep, shuddering breath, my mind racing with thoughts of Rachel, of our life together. How had it come to this? How had everything fallen apart so quickly, so completely? But before I could gather myself enough to respond, the man turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the alley. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the bitterness and the anger bubble up inside of me. Rachel had made her choice. I had no place in her life anymore. With a final, desperate glance at the bar, I turned and limped away. I had no destination in mind, no plan, no idea where I was going. I just needed to get away, to be alone. The next few hours were a blur. My body, broken and aching, carried me down roads I didn't recognize, through neighborhoods I'd never seen before. I wasn't sure if I was running away from the truth or from myself, but I couldn't stop moving. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't go home. Not to the house I shared with Rachel, not to the life I'd thought we were building together. I kept my head low, hoping no one would recognize me. It wasn't until the early morning hours that I found myself sitting in a worn-down diner, nursing a cup of coffee that was far too bitter for my taste. The pain in my chest seemed to subside only a little as I stared at my reflection in the window, the dark circles under my eyes, the hollow look on my face. The waitress came by offering me a refill, but I waved her off. My mind was somewhere else, lost in a tangle of confusion, betrayal, and self-doubt. I kept thinking about Rachel's smile, the way she'd looked at me when I walked into that bar. It was as if I didn't exist to her anymore. What had I done wrong? Was I not enough? I had worked hard for everything we had. I had given her everything. I had loved her with everything I had, and this was how she repaid me. A deep sigh escaped my lips, and I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 6 a.m. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, I would have to face her, face what she had done to us, to me. I didn't want to go back to our apartment. It felt like walking into a tomb, like admitting that everything I had believed was a lie. But I knew I had to. I couldn't keep running from the truth, not anymore. When I pulled up in front of the building, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, and my stomach churned with nausea. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to face the woman who had turned my world upside down. But she was my wife, and she still lived in that apartment. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady beneath me. The building loomed in front of me, as cold and uninviting as ever. I pushed open the door to the lobby and rode the elevator up to the top floor, where our apartment was. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard her voice from inside. Laughter, soft and familiar. It made my chest tighten and my heart squeezed painfully. I didn't want to believe it, but I could hear it in her voice. She wasn't alone. I hesitated, standing outside the door for what felt like an eternity. I knew she was in there, probably with him, laughing, living the life I had once imagined we would have together. But all I could think about was how she had betrayed me, how she had made me feel like I didn't matter, like I wasn't enough. I raised my hand to knock, but then I stopped. I had nothing left to say, no questions to ask, no apologies to give. She had made her choice, and I was done being the fool. With a final glance at the door, I turned around and walked away. I didn't expect to feel anything when I walked away. I thought I'd be numb, detached, almost relieved that I didn't have to confront Rachel, to face the woman who had been my everything and now felt like a stranger. But walking away was harder than I thought. My feet felt like lead, my chest tight, as if the weight of everything, the years we'd spent together, the trust I had given her, was pressing down on me. I made my way to my truck, my thoughts clouded by anger and confusion, and my body still aching from the beating at the bar. Each step felt like a betrayal to myself, like I was giving up on something I'd spent so long believing in. But deep down, I knew the truth. Rachel had already given up on us. I had been living in a fantasy, clinging to the hope that things could go back to the way they were, but they never would. I slid into the driver's seat of my truck and stared at the dashboard for a moment, my hands trembling. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what to do next. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay in that apartment, not with the memories of her and him lingering in the air, tainting everything I had once believed. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, the city lights flickering past me like a blur, I felt a deep emptiness settle in my chest. I had lost everything: my wife, my home, my sense of self. It was as if I had been living in a dream, and now I was awake, faced with the harsh reality that nothing would ever be the same again. It wasn't until I pulled off the highway onto a quiet back road that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I'd been holding my breath for hours, trying to push down the suffocating feelings that threatened to overwhelm me. I found an old abandoned parking lot and parked my truck. The stillness of the night wrapped around me, giving me a moment of peace, just enough time to gather my thoughts. But then my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something inside me told me it was Rachel. I stared at the screen for a few moments, my finger hovering over the answer button. The anger surged again. How dare she call me? After everything she'd done, after what I had witnessed, what was there left to say? I almost didn't pick up, but then I did. "Charlie," she said, her voice shaky, almost pleading. "Where are you?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't, not without my voice cracking. The emotions were too raw, too fresh. The last thing I wanted was to give her the satisfaction of hearing my pain. But I couldn't stay silent either. "I'm not where you want me to be, Rachel," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "And I'm not coming back." Her voice wavered. "Please, Charlie, I never meant for this to happen. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought—" "You thought what?" I interrupted, my words sharp and full of bitterness. "You thought I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice the lies? The hotel receipts? The late nights? You didn't think I'd realize you were sleeping with him?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It stretched on, a chasm of words unspoken. Finally, Rachel spoke again, but this time her voice was smaller, quieter, as if she had been reduced to something unrecognizable. "I never meant to hurt you, Charlie, I swear. I didn't know how to tell you that I was falling out of love. I didn't know how to make you understand that I needed something else." Something else. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the pressure building up again. "So this is my fault? You're blaming me for everything? For your affair? For your lies?" "I'm not blaming you." Her voice was rising now, desperate. "I don't know what happened. Everything just got so lost. We were two people living separate lives, and I don't know when we stopped being happy, Charlie. I don't know when we stopped being us." I squeezed my eyes shut, holding back tears. "I gave you everything, Rachel. Everything I had. And this is how you repay me? By throwing me away for some guy you met at a bar?" There was a moment of quiet, and then she sighed. It was a heavy, resigned sound. "I don't know what to say. I never wanted this to end like this. I thought maybe if I kept pretending everything was fine, it would fix itself. But it didn't. And now, it's too late." I didn't know what to say to that. The words caught in my throat. There was nothing left to say. The woman I had loved for so long, the woman who had promised to stand by me through everything, had already made her choice, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I hung up the phone, the silence that followed more deafening than any argument. For a long time I just sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, trying to steady my breath. I knew what had to happen next. I had to let go. Let go of the hope that things could somehow go back to the way they were. Let go of the idea that we could fix what was broken. But letting go was harder than I ever imagined. Even now, knowing the truth, knowing what she had done, a part of me still loved her. A part of me still wanted to fight for us. But I couldn't fight alone. The truth hit me like a freight train. Rachel was gone, and I was left standing in the wreckage of our life. And somehow, I knew that this was the moment where everything would change, the moment where I would have to face myself and ask who I was now, without her. The following days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, work, errands, even small talk with friends, but none of it meant anything. My mind kept circling back to that night, to Rachel and her new life, to the reality that my world had been torn apart. But as the days went on, something inside me started to shift. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was tired. Tired of being the man who had been deceived, the man who had tried to fix something that wasn't his fault. I was tired of feeling like a fool. I had nothing left to prove, no one left to impress, and in that emptiness, I found a strange sort of clarity. I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had with Rachel. I couldn't fix what was broken, but maybe, just maybe, I could build something new, a life that was mine, something real, something that didn't need her to define it. And so, with that thought in mind, I drove away from the city, away from the apartment, away from the life that no longer fit. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what lay beyond. I was ready to move on. The road stretched out before me, empty and quiet, like a metaphor for the future I had to face. My truck hummed steadily along the two-lane highway, the steady rhythm of the engine matching the pace of my racing thoughts. It was surreal how everything felt like a dream, like I was floating above the life I once knew. I could still feel Rachel's presence, her laughter echoing in my mind, the scent of her perfume on the pillow next to mine. But it was all fading, turning to static, a memory I couldn't hold on to no matter how hard I tried. I had always been the steady one in our relationship, the dependable one, the one who held everything together when things got tough. But now, it felt like all the pieces of my life had shattered in a single instant, and I was left standing in the wreckage, trying to piece together a version of myself that still made sense. I had loved Rachel more than I'd ever loved anyone, and now I had to let go of that love, not just for her, but for the future we'd built. I couldn't keep clinging to something that had already died. The pain in my chest wasn't physical anymore. It was deeper. It was like a raw wound, something I couldn't stitch up, no matter how hard I tried. I thought about all the times we had laughed together, the quiet nights spent on the couch, the plans we made for the future. We had talked about kids, how we would raise them, where we'd take vacations. We'd dreamed of growing old together, but now it felt like all those dreams had been stolen from me. And the worst part? The betrayal. The realization that everything I had believed in was built on lies. She had been with him, laughing with him, loving him while I was out there believing in the version of her I had created in my head. It was like a punch to the gut, a reminder that I had never truly known her at all. A few days passed, and I kept driving, away from the city, away from the apartment, away from the life that felt like it was slowly suffocating me. I didn't have a clear destination in mind, just a need to get away from everything that reminded me of Rachel. But as the landscape blurred by, I found something unexpected: space. The kind of silence that allows you to hear your own thoughts. The kind of solitude that forces you to face yourself. I pulled into a small town in the middle of nowhere, some nameless dot on the map. I was far enough from the life I had built to not be reminded of it at every turn. As the sun dipped low behind the mountains, I found an old motel on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered weakly, but it was enough. I needed a bed, a roof over my head, and some time to think. Inside the room, the faded wallpaper and creaky floorboards were a far cry from the comfort I had once known. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, I realized that maybe I didn't need comfort anymore. Maybe I didn't need anything except time to heal, time to mourn what I had lost, and time to figure out who I was now, without her. I had spent so many years defining myself through our relationship. I had been the husband, the provider, the partner. But now that she was gone, who was I? Who was Charlie Wilson without Rachel? The question gnawed at me, and for the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it. The next morning, I woke up early. The room was still dark, but the sound of birds chirping outside reminded me that the world was still turning, even if mine had come to a screeching halt. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of dread. The ache in my chest was still there, like a heavy weight pressing down on me, but I knew I had to keep moving. I hadn't spoken to Rachel since that phone call. Part of me had hoped that she would reach out again, but another part of me knew better. She had made her choice, and while I was angry, so angry, I also realized something. I couldn't keep holding on to her. I couldn't keep waiting for the woman I once knew to come back. She was gone, and I was still here. I had to start living for myself, even if I didn't know who that person was anymore. So I made the call. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I had to. I needed closure, even if I didn't think I would get it. Charlie, it's you. Rachel's voice crackled through the phone. There was a strange hesitation in her tone, like she didn't know what to say to me anymore. But then she spoke again, her voice softer this time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm not looking for your apology, Rachel. I don't need you to apologize. I just need you to understand that this is it. We're done. She was silent for a moment, and then the tears started to fall. I could hear them in her voice as she tried to speak, but the words kept catching in her throat. Explaining it was the first time my whole world came crashing down. The tears started to fall. I don't know what happened to us, Charlie. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to fix myself. The guilt in her voice cut through me. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be the one she turned to when everything had already fallen apart. But I also couldn't ignore the pain in her words. The woman I had once loved was still in there somewhere, lost and broken, just like me. I don't think you can fix us, Rachel. I don't think you can fix yourself with me, I said quietly, the weight of the words hanging heavy in the air. We've both lost something. We've both broken, and I don't think we can put it back together. There was another long pause. I knew she was crying now, and part of me wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but I knew better. I had to let her go. You're right, Charlie, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I wish I had never hurt you. But I can't undo it, and neither can you. No, I said, my voice firm. I can't undo it, but I can move on, and so can you. The days that followed were slow. I had no illusions that I was miraculously healed. The ache in my chest would linger for a long time. I knew that. But, slowly, I began to take small steps forward. I started running again, something I used to do with Rachel on lazy Saturday mornings. At first, it was hard to put one foot in front of the other, but eventually, the rhythm of my breath and the pounding of my feet on the pavement became comforting. It reminded me that I was still here, that I was still alive, even if I felt broken. I spent the next few weeks in that small town, working remotely and trying to piece together the fragments of myself. I took long walks, ate at diners, and even met a few locals who didn't know anything about my past. It felt like a different life, one that didn't have Rachel's shadow hanging over it. I wasn't entirely sure who I was becoming, but I knew one thing. I was starting to rebuild something, and slowly, I began to feel a shift inside. The anger, the sadness, the overwhelming feeling of betrayal, they were still there, but they didn't control me anymore. I wasn't defined by what had happened between Rachel and me. I was more than that. And one day, while I was sitting on the porch of a small cabin I had rented for a few days, I realized something. I wasn't the same person I was when I had walked away from her. I wasn't the same person who had tried to fix everything. I was someone new, someone who had finally let go. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Time has a strange way of reshaping us. It doesn't heal all wounds, but it gives us the distance to breathe, to process, to understand that some things are beyond repair. My life was still fractured, but as I spent more days alone, I began to realize something. I had been waiting for Rachel to fix me. I had been waiting for her to come back, to apologize, to somehow undo the hurt. But what I had forgotten was that I couldn't wait forever. I couldn't stand still and watch my life slip by, waiting for a resolution that may never come. It was early October when I decided to leave the small town. I had spent almost 2 months there, running, thinking, healing, or at least trying to. I had learned a few things during my time away. First, that I wasn't the man who had walked away from that bar, and second, that I wasn't the man who had clung so desperately to a relationship that had long since deteriorated. I was someone new, someone who had survived, and now it was time to keep moving forward. I packed up the few things I had scattered around the cabin. I had come there with the intention of escaping everything, but now I was leaving with a different purpose. I didn't know where I was going next. I didn't need to know. I only knew that I had to keep moving, physically and emotionally. I made my way back to the city, though I didn't return directly to the apartment. That part of me was still too fragile, too raw. Instead, I rented a small studio in a quiet part of town, far enough from the places Rachel and I used to frequent. I didn't want to be reminded of her every time I stepped outside. And while I was still working through the pieces of our broken marriage, I started to pick up other fragments of myself. I found solace in running, something that, at one point, felt like an escape from my problems, but now it felt like a reclaiming of myself. I ran without any particular destination in mind, just the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the sound of my breath filling my ears. The physical pain helped clear my mind, numbing the emotional ache. It was a simple, humbling kind of relief. The world felt more manageable when I was running. Then came the days when I began picking up small projects again, things I had let slide for too long. It was an effort, but slowly it gave me a sense of purpose. At first, I just reorganized my finances, checked on the investments I had put off. Then, I took on small freelance accounting gigs, things I could do from my new apartment. And every time I finished a project, I felt like I was inching a little closer to the man I used to be before everything fell apart. But the most important step I took was this. I stopped thinking about Rachel. It didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when her face would flash in my mind, when her voice would ring in my ears, but I realized that the only way to move forward was to stop trying to fix the past. I couldn't go back, no matter how badly I wished I could. So I let her memory fade. Slowly, gently. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about giving myself the freedom to heal, to let go of the pain and the anger that I had carried with me for so long. 3 months had passed since I returned to the city. Life had settled into a new routine. I wasn't sure if it was the routine I wanted, but it was the routine I needed to find my feet again. I had become a stranger to my old self, but in the process, I found something else, a quiet strength I hadn't realized was there. One evening, I decided to stop by a local bar, a low-key, quiet place where people gathered to unwind after work. It wasn't my usual spot, but I needed to get out of my apartment. I hadn't met anyone new, hadn't really tried, but I figured some light social interaction wouldn't hurt. I didn't expect anything more than a drink and a conversation with a friendly stranger. But then I saw her. At first, I thought I was imagining it. She looked almost like Rachel, but I knew it wasn't her. The woman was sitting at the bar, nursing a drink, staring into the glass with the kind of intensity that told me she was lost in thought. Her hair was dark, her posture confident, yet there was something vulnerable about her, a subtle sadness in her eyes that reminded me of myself. I wasn't looking for anything, definitely not another relationship. But as I stood there watching her, I realized that this was the first time I had truly looked at someone since Rachel, and for the first time, I wasn't overwhelmed by grief or anger. It wasn't even that I was trying to replace Rachel, it was simply that I had opened myself up to the possibility of something new. For a long time, I thought I would never feel that spark again, but as I walked over to her, something stirred within me. A curiosity, a reminder that even after everything, there was still room in my life for someone else. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice tentative. She looked up, and for a moment our eyes locked. Her lips twitched into a small smile, one that held no pretensions, just a simple acknowledgement. "Sure," she said, her voice light. "It's a quiet night anyway." We talked for hours, not about anything deep or life-altering, just about the small things, books, music, places we wanted to visit, and the kind of food we liked. It felt effortless. There was no pressure, no heavy baggage, just two people passing the time, seeing where the conversation took them. I didn't know where it would go from there. I wasn't ready for anything more than this moment. But in that conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Connection. A connection not defined by heartbreak or betrayal, but by shared experience. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was a reminder that there was still something worth fighting for. Not in a relationship, but in life. In me. The weeks that followed felt like an uncharted path. I still had moments when I thought of Rachel, when the memory of our life together would catch me off guard, pulling me back to a place I didn't want to be. But I didn't fight it anymore. I let the memories come and go. I let myself feel the sadness, the loss, the anger. But I didn't let it define me. I started to realize that healing doesn't look like what you think. It's not a neat, linear path. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It's about accepting what was and allowing yourself to move forward. The scar is still there, but it no longer dominates my life. I learned that healing is messy, it's imperfect, it's not about forgetting the hurt, it's about growing from it. When I thought I was ready, I began to open myself up to new experiences, to new people, to new possibilities. Not because I needed to replace what I had lost, but because I was starting to remember who I was before I was someone's husband, before I defined myself by anyone other than me. Rachel was a chapter in my life, but she was no longer my story. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start a new one. Life doesn't come with a manual. There's no guidebook that tells you how to pick up the pieces after everything falls apart. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the real strength lies in the ability to start over, in the courage to walk into the unknown with nothing but your own heart guiding you. As for me, I'm still learning. I'm still figuring out who I am, but every day feels like a step forward, a step toward the life I'm building for myself. The road is long and it's never really over, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not running from it. I'm walking it. On my own, but not alone.